The rain came down like sheets of glass, hammering the tin roof of the Adebayo farmhouse just as dusk bled into darkness. The sky was an angry slate, and the wind tore through the trees like something alive. Isaac Adebayo, lean and weathered from years on the land, bolted from his porch to salvage the tarp covering his drying maize. His bare feet splashed through the muddy yard as he wrestled with the flapping sheet. That was when he saw it. Headlights, dimensions, sputtering, swerving. A black SUV careened through the bend just past the gravel lane and skidded off the road with a metallic scream, slamming into a tree trunk with a crunch that echoed through the rain. Without hesitation, Isaac dropped the tarp and ran. The vehicle hissed steam. One door hung open. Inside, crumpled and bleeding, was a man in a soaked grey suit, mid-40s, African, expensive wristwatch barely clinging to his wrist. Isaac didn't ask questions. He pulled the stranger from the wreck, slung his arm over his shoulder, and half carried, half dragged him through the downpour back to the house. Ruth, his wife, stood at the doorway with her arms crossed and eyes narrow, already uneasy. Their 2 children peeked out from behind her. Isaac ushered the man inside, sat him by the fire, fetched a towel, dry clothes, and some of his own balm for the man's bruised temple. The stranger didn't say much. He winced when Isaac touched his shoulder, but otherwise kept his head down, eyes scanning the room like he didn't trust walls. Ruth reluctantly ladled soup into a tin bowl. The children placed a piece of yam on a plate. They didn't have enough for guests, but they gave anyway. The man ate slowly, almost like he wasn't used to being served. Ruth watched him, suspicious. She had reasons. 3 times they'd been robbed by men who just needed shelter. But Isaac simply knelt beside the fire, drying his hands, and studied the man quietly. The rain didn't let up. Thunder rumbled overhead like war drums. Then, gently, Isaac spoke. "Storm don't care who you are," he said, his voice low but sure. "But neither do I. You're safe here." The man, Michael Osei, said nothing, but his eyes flicked up for the first time, and in that brief glance something shifted. Years ago, Isaac Adebayo wore crisp shirts and polished shoes, working as a mid-level accountant at a reputable firm in Lagos. He had a small car, a growing savings account, and a future. But everything unraveled the day his name appeared in a corruption audit, falsely implicated in a financial scandal that shook the company. The real culprits vanished behind international bank accounts, and Isaac, without money or connections, took the fall. After nearly 2 years in prison, branded a thief by colleagues and neighbours alike, he returned to the only place left to him, his late father's farm on the outskirts of Ibadan. He arrived with little more than silence and shame, but resolved to rebuild from dust. The farm, a scatter of dry cassava and struggling maize, resisted him at every turn. The irrigation pipes cracked from years of neglect. The rains were cruelly inconsistent, and the soil seemed to grieve with him. Still, Isaac planted. He woke before dawn, worked barefoot until night, and taught his children to do the same. Where the world had failed him, he clung to the land with quiet dignity. Ruth Adebayo bore the weight differently. Once a schoolteacher in Ikeja, she had loved city life, the structure, the certainty, the idea that their children would rise higher than they had. When Isaac fell, she stood by him, but the bitterness clung. She sold yam, pepper, and dried vegetables at the local market, bartering with women who wore the same tired faces every week. She worried that her daughter Kemi, bright and electric with ideas, would get trapped in this same dusty rhythm, dreaming of engineering in a city where dreams cost more than they earned in a year. Ruth didn't say much about the past anymore, but her silences said plenty. The quiet sighs when the roof leaked, the furrowed brow when Isaac gave food to strangers, the long looks at Kemi when she talked about scholarships they couldn't afford. Kemi, 16, burned with ambition. She studied under kerosene light, sketched mechanical diagrams in the margins of her notebooks, and read borrowed textbooks like they were lifelines. Her room was filled with ideas, makeshift windmills, irrigation models made from bottles and wire, and big city dreams she dared not speak too loudly. Her younger brother Taupe, just 9, danced through the fields with a stick sword and laughter that reminded them what joy used to feel like. He helped where he could, fetching water, scaring goats from the crops, always shadowing Isaac with quiet reverence. And then there was Michael Osei, soaked and silent in their living room that stormy night. They didn't know that he was the CEO of Novacore Foods, a powerful figure in West African agribusiness. For weeks, Michael had gone off-grid, traveling through back roads, posing as a middleman, assessing which rural farms could support Novacore's upcoming rural sourcing initiative. It was his plan: cut out inflated third parties, invest directly in grassroots farmers, and reshape the food economy from the soil up. But everything collapsed when his deputy, driven by greed and ambition, tried to eliminate him. A tainted drink, a forged press release. Michael barely survived, fled with nothing but his ID, hidden under his belt, and a car that crashed not far from the Adebayo farm. Now, bruised and hunted, he sat among strangers who offered him food they couldn't spare and warmth he didn't deserve. He was used to boardrooms and sealed deals, but here, in the flickering lamplight of a broken home that still chose kindness, Michael Osei found something rare: humanity. They didn't know his name, they didn't ask, and somehow that made all the difference. Michael stayed for 2 days, his wounds healing beneath the quiet rhythm of the Adebayo household. The rain eased, but he lingered, not just out of necessity, but something harder to name. In the stillness of that mud brick home, he saw a different kind of wealth. Isaac rose before dawn, hands calloused and movements deliberate, guiding Tope through the moonlit rows of maize, speaking softly about the phases of the moon and soil breathing. It wasn't science, not as Michael knew it, but it was knowledge rooted in centuries, passed through calloused palms and memory. At midday, while Isaac worked the fields, Michael watched Kemi at the back table, her brow furrowed as she cracked open the back of a broken radio. With scraps and wires, she rerouted connections, adjusting resistors with the confidence of someone who had never been taught limits. Her hands moved like she was building something bigger than she knew how to explain. That night, over watery stew, he listened to Ruth return from the market furious, arguing with local ward leaders about missing fertilizer allocations, accusing them of siphoning supplies meant for small farmers. She was sharp, unafraid, and Michael saw the weight she carried, not just of the farm, but of holding her family's fragile hope together. By the second night, something stirred in Michael. These weren't people he could simply forget. He had come to these parts looking for feasibility studies and sourcing potential. What he found was a blueprint for resilience. On the morning of the third day, as the family prepared for market runs and fieldwork, Michael dressed quietly. He folded the borrowed clothes, left a thank you note scribbled on the back of an old receipt. Your kindness saved more than just a life. May the rain be gentle on your field. But he also took something else, a photo of Isaac's small, leather-bound ledger. Michael had noticed it tucked beside the radio, filled with handwritten notes on rainfall patterns, crop rotation, soil tests, seasonal cycle, painstaking records that reflected discipline, intelligence, and deep stewardship of the land. It was a farmer's journal, yes, but it read like a data set. Isaac had never called it anything grand, but to Michael, it was proof. Proof that systems could thrive in the margin, that some farmers weren't waiting for charity, they were ready for partnership. By dusk that same day, Michael stood in his glass office in Lagos once more, bruises hidden beneath his suit. The boardroom buzzed with confusion as he entered unannounced, but he didn't flinch. We're restarting the local supply pilot, he said firmly, and I found the model farmer. Build everything around him. His board exchanged glances. He didn't wait for their approval. He handed his assistant the photo of Isaac's ledger and gave specific instructions. Find him, but quietly, under a false identity. No logos, no Novacore, no pressure. He knew too well how exposure could destroy what it aimed to help. Back in the village, Isaac returned to routine. He repaired a fence post, helped Tope with reading, checked on the cassava shoots. Michael's sudden departure was curious, but not unheard of. Storms pass. Strangers move on. Life goes on. Until one morning, weeks later, a well-dressed woman appeared at the farm gate. She carried a badge from a newly formed agricultural NGO, Harvest Forward Initiative, and spoke with crisp, respectful Yoruba. She said they'd been reviewing anonymous case studies on innovative smallholder farming. One farmer's methods stood out, his. She invited Isaac to Abuja to present his process at a national symposium on sustainable agriculture, expenses paid, travel arranged. Confused but cautious, Isaac looked at Ruth. She crossed her arms but said nothing. Kimi's eyes shone. The woman smiled kindly. "It's just a conversation," she said, "but it could change everything." Isaac stood in the doorway, heart pounding. Somewhere far away, Michael Osei waited, knowing the seed he'd planted had just begun to sprout. The flight to Abuja was the first time Isaac had ever left the Southwest in years, and every moment of it made his palms sweat. In the airport, he sat stiffly among suited travelers, clutching his file of notes like a lifeline. The NGO had given him a new pair of shoes, but they pinched, and his only good shirt was still a little damp from ironing it with a pot lid the night before. Ruth hadn't said much when he left, just kissed his cheek and muttered, "Don't let them laugh at you." But she'd watched him from the doorway until the car disappeared down the dirt road. At the summit, the hall shimmered with lights and lanyards, microphones, projectors, press. Isaac felt like a lost goat among lions. But when he stood at the podium and saw the tired faces of other small farmers in the back rows, something shifted. He cleared his throat, steadied his voice, and began. He spoke not like a lecturer, but like a man who'd bled into the earth. He described how they tracked rainfall with bottles and shadows, how rotating cassava and maize was more than tradition, it was recovery. He told them about Ruth fighting for fertilizer, about his daughter building irrigation models from tin cans. "We are not helpless," he said, his voice gaining strength. "We are just unheard." He didn't offer flashy charts or global strategy. He offered what he knew: honesty, struggle, and quiet triumph. In the back of the room, wearing plain clothes and a cap low over his brow, Michael Osei listened intently, unmoving. He had watched CEOs stumble through TED Talks with million-dollar budgets. But in Isaac's simple words, he heard something rarer: conviction. After the applause, Isaac sat down sweating, unsure if he had embarrassed himself or planted a seed. But by day's end, a representative from Novacor, introduced only as Mr. Dapo, approached him with a contract. They wanted Isaac as a regional training consultant for their rural expansion initiative. 3 million naira up front, travel and housing stipends. The figure stunned him. Isaac blinked, clutching the folder like it might vanish. He didn't sign, not yet. Suspicion clawed at his chest. Who had given them his name? How had they known his methods? "You were recommended," Dapo smiled, "by someone who believes in you." When Isaac returned home, the news spread before he even reached the gate. Ruth met him with trembling hands, laughing, crying, spinning Kemi in her arms. 3 million naira, she kept whispering, as if afraid the number would change. For a day, it felt like the sun was shining only on them. But small villages are hungry places, and fortune always draws shadows. Within a week, the whispers began. "Novacor, foreigners buying land? Didn't he just house a stranger last month?" Some neighbors stopped waving, others stared too long. Then came Alhaji Kasim, the local chief who'd long controlled farming grants and district permits. He called a village meeting, claiming Isaac was misleading the community. "His father never registered that land," he barked. "It is state land. He is a squatter with a lucky mouth." His words stung deeper than they should have. A formal complaint was filed. The local registry froze the Adebayo land for investigation. Suddenly, everything was in limbo. Novacor's team sent a pause notice, pending legal clarity. The dream dissolved overnight. At home, Ruth's elation turned brittle. She didn't scream. She just went silent. One evening, while washing yam slices in cold water, she said, without looking up, "You brought another curse to this family." Isaac stood there, hollow, the weight of old shame returning like a familiar ghost. He tried to explain. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't lie." But the words sounded weak even to him. In Lagos, Michael faced his own reckoning. Word of his anonymous trip had leaked. The board was furious, not just at the risk, but at the optics. "You were poisoned, Michael," one director spat. "You disappear, return with a contract for some unknown farmer, and expect us to approve." The board threatened a vote of no confidence. They demanded he rescind the deal, issue a public statement distancing Novacor from the Adebayo case, and remain within protocol. For the first time in his career, Michael found himself cornered by politics, by power, and by the very structure he had built. But neither man could sleep. One in a mud home surrounded by suspicion, the other in a penthouse surrounded by enemies. What connected them now was more than a stormy night. It was a fragile promise made in silence, one that now risked being buried under greed, gossip, and fear. Michael walked into the Novacore boardroom with the calm of a man who had already made peace with the fallout. The executives sat in stiff suits, lips pursed, ready for another crisis management pitch. But Michael didn't flinch. He connected his laptop, dimmed the lights, and began with a simple image. Isaac Adebayo, kneeling in his fields, showing his son how to read the sky. Then came others. Kemi rewiring the broken radio. Ruth debating fertilizer allocations in the village square. Finally, he played the audio from the Abuja summit. Isaac's voice filling the sterile boardroom with its quiet power. We are not helpless. We are just unheard. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Michael dropped the final slides. Internal reports showing discrepancies in Novacore's existing rural contracts. Payments inflated, outputs falsified, supplies diverted. The corruption Isaac had hinted at was real, and Michael had proof. He didn't just teach us how to farm better, Michael said, his voice rising. He showed us what we stopped seeing, our responsibility. He turned to the room. If we don't work with people like him, we don't deserve to call ourselves an African food company. There was stunned silence. A few board members exchanged uncertain glances, but no one spoke. The data was airtight, the humanity undeniable. Michael let it sit before delivering the twist. I'm resigning as CEO, he said. Gasps, then murmurs. One woman began to protest, but Michael raised a hand. I'm not walking away. I'm stepping forward. I'm launching a new initiative, Ground Roots, a farmer-led, technology-supported startup that puts local growers at the center of the supply chain. We'll start small, direct to market, but we'll grow honest. He clicked the final slide, the Ground Roots logo beside a photo of Isaac, hands muddy, eyes proud. And he'll be the face of it. Before they could react further, Michael added, I'm donating 10% of my Novacore shares into a rural development fund, scholarships, tool grants, infrastructure repair, not from the company, from me. A different kind of silence followed, not just shock but reflection. He had thrown away power for purpose and dared them to follow. Michael gathered his things, nodded once, and left the boardroom without waiting for applause. He had already won. 3 months later, the Adebayo farm no longer looked like a patch of struggle. It looked like a blueprint. The dusty plots had transformed into lush, organized rows, fed by a newly installed solar-powered irrigation system that gleamed under the Ibadan sun. Water flowed in steady pulses through the once cracked soil, and for the first time in years, the land responded with gratitude. Maize stood tall, cassava leaves fanned wide. The sound of laughter and work blended in the air as other villagers, now employed, moved between tasks, harvesting, weeding, learning. Ruth managed the market supply side with the precision of a businesswoman, negotiating deals, overseeing transport, and mentoring younger women who once only sold tomatoes by the roadside. Her sharp voice now carried authority instead of exhaustion, and every evening she returned home with records, balance sheets, and a satisfied smile. Isaac had become something greater than he ever imagined. Not just a farmer, but a mentor, a voice, a leader. Over 50 farmers from surrounding villages came to him now, seeking training in sustainable practices, crop tracking, and land rotation. He taught them beneath the same mango tree where he used to fix broken tools alone. And sometimes he caught himself smiling at the memory. His face had appeared in national agricultural journals, not as a token rural success story, but as a case study, farmer-led innovation in Nigeria's food future. People greeted him with respect in town. Some even asked for photos, but he remained humble, never forgetting the storm that brought the stranger to his door. Kemi, radiant and unstoppable, had received a full university scholarship to study agricultural engineering in Abuja. Her soil moisture tracking app, built from scratch on her old phone, had been picked up by Novacore's development team, and under Michael's mentorship, it was being scaled for nationwide use. She sent home emails filled with technical updates and gratitude, always ending them with, "Tell Dad he was right to believe." Taupe, now a little older, followed Isaac everywhere, asking questions, sketching tools in the dirt, already dreaming bigger. Isaac walked through his fields each morning, hands behind his back, inspecting the soil, nodding at the workers, smiling at the sky. He didn't walk like a man chasing survival anymore. He walked like a teacher, a builder, a steward of land that had finally learned to give back. Michael visited now and then, never with cameras or fanfare. He came as a friend, walking beside Isaac at dusk, sharing updates about ground roots, always careful to stay in the background. "It's your story now," he once said, watching Taupe chase a goat through the fields. Isaac had nodded, the wind soft against his face. For a man once buried by shame, the harvest had finally come, and it was deeper than food. It was dignity, it was legacy. The rain came again, but this time it wasn't a warning. It fell softly, like a blessing, pattering gently on the new tin roof Isaac had built with his own hands. He sat on the porch, a warm mug of tea between his fingers, steam rising into the cool afternoon air. In the distance, he could hear Kemi and Taupe laughing, chasing each other through the damp green rows that once barely fed them. Ruth appeared beside him, her apron dusted with flour, and placed a fresh loaf of bread on the small table. She didn't say much, just smiled, the quiet contentment between them stronger than words. Then came a knock at the door, gentle, familiar. Isaac rose, opened it, and there stood Michael, rain dripping from his coat, his smile easy and warm. They didn't hug, they didn't need to. Michael simply reached into his bag and pulled out a small, wrapped box. "For you," he said. "I thought it was time." Isaac unwrapped it slowly, carefully, revealing a leather-bound book with gold-embossed writing on the cover. "The Man Who Fed Me in a Storm." Michael's voice was quiet but steady. "It's my memoir. Chapter 1 is about your family." Isaac stared down at the book, his calloused hands trembling just a little. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He simply looked up, eyes full, and nodded. Rain tapped softly on the windows. The fire inside crackled, and somewhere between the past and the future, a man once broken by shame stood tall in his truth. "Fade out,"